Well, to discuss this and much more within the aviation sector, I have with me Erica Chun, the Chief Operating Officer of Jet Support Services. Good to have you join us on the show.
Thank you.
Now, ICAO predicts that by 2050 we'll have triple of the amount of carbon dioxide emissions that we already have. Looking at domestic flights within the US and China alone, that accounts for about a quarter of the total emissions we have out there, despite efforts to have much more fuel-efficient planes. How critical is this situation?
Well, there's really no end in sight.
I'm bringing it contextually back to Nigeria, what we should also be doing.
Well, there's really no end in sight. I think you have to look at the problems critically first of all. There are two sides to the story. There is altitude carbon dioxide and non-altitude carbon dioxide. So the altitude carbon dioxide, of course, jetliners are major contributors, if not the only contributors to carbon dioxide at altitude. But if you compare that to non-altitude carbon dioxide contribution, you will see that aviation is still, a very, very, very low culprit. If you look at the numbers, the average passenger burns about 3.4 liters per 100 kilometers while flying an airliner, compared to your typical car where you burn about 15 liters for every 100 kilometers. So, well, with the anticipated increase in air travel, all we expect to see is better technology in producing aircraft engines. Also, there has been talks about taxing or placing taxes on fuel for aviation, but we don't see that coming into effect anytime soon.
And we're also seeing Airbus saying that the number of commercial aircraft in operation will double by 48,000 planes worldwide by 2038. What are your expectations as well, talking about improving and having fuel-efficient planes?
Well, it has to go back to the aerospace industry. Those numbers are still very far away from Africa. I mean, if you look at the entire amount of airplanes operating within Nigeria, for instance, compare it to, say, for instance, one state in America, Ohio, with 600 airports, you will see that we're still very far away from being major contributors to this effect. So, well, yes, I mean, the supply part of airplanes, of course, is as a function of the projected increase in demand.
And let's also talk about airlines now that are operating within Nigeria. Some of the issues we've had, the assembling of aircraft and a whole lot more. But right now, we've had varied issues from Jet A1 fuel, the price and all of those, the absence of a functional MRO and a whole lot more. Let's start first with establishing an MRO that is functional in Nigeria. That's part of conscious efforts to make the country an aviation hub. We are not strategizing at all. That's what it seems like, isn't it?
Well, I'll partially agree with you. Maintenance is 40% of an airline's cost. So you, and of course, this maintenance is costed in Forex. So you see, the problem has always been that Nigerian airliners have 90% of their revenue in Naira and 60% of their costs in dollars. So you have your expense in a very strong currency, and then once you have any slight fluctuation in the currency exchange rate, it's harder. So yes, establishing an MRO will be a critical cost optimization factor for airlines in Nigeria. There has been a couple of initiatives privately by some airlines to be able to develop capacity locally to maintain their own airplanes. But a lot more still has to be done.
But as an aviation expert, so many, the man on the street will want to ask questions like, for example, our national carrier, we started efforts towards that line and then it got suspended. You look at the MRO as well, every single action we start off, we necessarily don't have enough investment to pull through and then we suspend again. What is the issue here now? Would you say it's the lack of political will? Would you say it's a lack of drive from the Minister of State for Aviation? Or would you say it's the domestic airlines that are threatened by whatever growth we'll have and are frustrating these efforts?
Well, world over, necessity is the mother of invention. And well, there has been clamor about a national MRO, but if you look at it critically, world over, there really are no such initiatives. supply.
Along our region here.
Yeah, well, supply is generally driven by demand. So what has happened recently is that airlines have begun to rethink their cost optimization strategies and see that, okay, if it is cheaper for me to maintain my aircraft locally, I would look at maintain my aircraft locally. So we're going to see on the balance sheet side from some of these airlines sustain, or what we hope to see from some of these airlines are sustained investments in maintenance, provisioning. For example, Aero has set up a major MRO in Nigeria with strong capabilities to go as high as D-checks. So these initiatives are beginning to trickle down, and I'm sure in the next 5 years you would see a lot more initiatives geared towards bringing down the cost of maintaining airplanes in Nigeria.
Now, the Minister of State for Aviation says that, well, looking at Project Nigeria Air, it's still taking a little bit of a stall. It's suspended, not cancelled. So if the project were to kick off come 2020, what infrastructure do you expect to be laid down properly to kickstart? First and foremost, the acquisition of the planes. What sort of planes would you advise?
Well, it depends on the strategy.
The argument is still around Boeing 737 there.
Well, it depends on the strategy more or less, but I would say the investment should go more into the airports. You cannot support, the airports currently in their state of design cannot support any sort of expansion. If you look at majority of our airlines, 90% of our flights are between Lagos, Abuja, Kano, and Port Harcourt, all earning Naira. So if we are truly going to be a frontier in Africa, we have to start thinking about bringing the world to Nigeria and connecting the world in Nigeria. You simply don't have the airports to do that. So would that come from private investments? I don't know. Would that come from the government? I really don't know. But there has also been talks about privatizing the airport. So they go hand in hand. I think it's a strategy the Ministry of Aviation are looking at critically, privatizing the airport and then balancing that off with setting up a truly world-class
This
airline.
talk of privatization of the airport also brings my mind to the privatization of the power sector. Initially, the thought was that when you have private entities driving this course of action, then you would have much more profit, you would have some level of sanity brought to the table. But now let's talk about the infrastructure that we've seen so far. At the end of the day, government still has to pave the way or lay the base properly. We've seen a stall in infrastructural development in our airports. You travel to London, you travel to China, and a whole lot more. And our airports, for example, the Murtala Mohammed International Airport here in Lagos, does not necessarily meet that class.
Absolutely. I think the issue is capital. Then you can also talk about sustainability. The government has its hands in too many things, and the airport has to leave the exclusive list. Government has made it very clear that they cannot afford the kind of investments required in turning the airports into global competitors. So the problem is capital. And I think that once these airports are privatized, there is a market, definitely, and we can truly see our airlines flourish based on this kind of structure.
And there are so many calls as well from from airline companies in Nigeria. The cost of aviation fuel. Jet A1 is still expensive, over 250 naira thereabout. And there have been so many calls for intervention. Why is this still expensive, and what can be done?
Well, I think
compared to the price of aviation fuel in the UAE, for example.
Well, I think in the UAE there is still deregulation. There is still government subsidy in Jet A1, but in Nigeria it was completely deregulated. So you've seen escalation in prices based on various cost spectrums. I think what the airlines should do more or less would be, or a way to counteract that is to invest more in fuel efficient aircraft that will enable them drive down the cost of
but that's also expensive, and this cost of Jet A1 fuel, it has a cyclical approach, because at the end of the day, the air travelers are the ones who have to bear the brunt when it comes to tickets.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's the cost of Jet A1 is tied to a lot of factors. Of course, you need to have functional refineries, you need to have proper structures in place to deliver the fuel directly to the airports. So I think, yes, it is critical that the cost of Jet A1 is driven down, but more importantly, there are much more problems other than just the cost of fuel.
Wrapping up conversations now, let's talk about passenger traffic within the season. It's the U-tide, everybody's traveling here and there. First and foremost, dealing with the proposition that we have to prepare for Hamilton and safety comes first, and also the issue of cancelled flights and delays. How are we supposed to manage this too? NCA has already come out to issue precautionary measures that should be taken, but let's talk about cancelled and delayed flights this time around.
Well, to be honest, I wouldn't say the airlines are 100% to blame when it comes to this.
I like the word honest. To be honest, the airlines have to be honest.
Yeah, to be honest, well, a core part of this problem has to also fall back on the government. But I would say, in all honesty, this is the most proactive government we have seen when it comes to airport infrastructure. There has been sustained investments in modernizing the navigation and landing facilities to enable these airlines operate at low visibility airports. So we have seen, I mean, Benin now has an ILS, a fully functional ILS system. I believe the Lagos, Abuja, and Kano ILSs are being upgraded to Cat 3. So this is all, I mean, in a way to optimize the airlines business, because this is the busiest period of, this is the highest point of productivity for any airline. November, December, you have a high surge in travel demand. So we hope that all these plans come into effect, and then the airlines can be able to truly optimize this this high demand period. And
how would you rate the oversight function of the NCAA? Now, private airlines operators have also said that, well, one of the biggest issues they've had is on-time billing. We've not necessarily had that.
Well, we have seen also very good improvement in regulation. I would say the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority within the last 3-4 years has, I mean, metamorphosized, I mean, this is just my opinion, into an organization that truly listens to the operators. We have had numerous engagements with the Civil Aviation Authority, and they have listened. They have listened. We have even seen amendments in the civil aviation regulation, just in order to make the operating environment much more conducive for the airlines. Because, I mean, the CAA has to realize that without the airlines, they can never be a regulator.
And what's your projection for 2020? 2019, once again, we've been able to successfully travel all throughout the year without having any fatal accidents or crashes or near-fatal incidents here and there. Minor situations that happen abroad as well, but no fatalities so far. What's your projection for 2020?
Well, we also hope to see strong and continued consolidation on airline expansion. Clearly, there is a gap between the demand and the supply. That's on one side. The airlines are also investing a lot in increased training. They also we have seen orders on modern airplanes. So we're expecting to see sustained improvement in the operating environment in 2020.
Thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Erica Achim, the Chief Operating Officer of Jet Support Services. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me, David.
Well, we are going to take a quick break. When we come back, we have plenty more reports from the rest of Nigeria, Africa, the international front. The conversation gets bigger.